My name is Claire, I'm 43, and I'm not proud of how I feel right now. There's this silence inside me that used to be filled with certainty, laughter, soft touches. And today, sitting in this tiny coffee shop just off campus, I'm staring into my cappuccino like it might explain what's happening to my life. Or who I've become. I came here to surprise my stepson, Julian, to bring him a care package, give him a hug, tell him I miss him. But the truth? I think I came here to remember what connection feels like. My husband, Tom, and I used to have it. That click. That fire. We'd meet eyes from across a room and everything around us would blur. He made me feel seen. Desired. Important. We blended our families 7 years ago, and it was chaos in the best way. Julian was still a teenager then, messy and moody, but kind. Tom would wrap his arms around me in the kitchen while I cooked, whisper something ridiculous in my ear, and it would send shivers all the way down my back. Now when he hugs me, it feels like he's just checking a box. He kissed me last week, just before he left for his overnight business trip. I was rinsing dishes at the sink, and he came up behind me, placed a kiss on the back of my neck. It should have made my stomach flutter. But it didn't. It was soft, sure. Familiar. But I didn't feel anything. And when I turned to kiss him properly, he smiled distractedly, already reaching for his keys. I smiled back, like always. Like I'm supposed to. That's the part that eats at me. Not that he's pulling away, but that I am, too. Quietly. Secretly. I hold my breath sometimes when we lie in bed, waiting to see if he'll roll toward me. If his hand will find my hip, like it used to. Sometimes he does. But the weight of it feels performative now. A placeholder. Like muscle memory, not desire. When did that start? I've asked myself that 100 times. I think it was sometime last winter. Julian was home for break. It had snowed all morning, the roads were slick, and Tom was buried in work emails even though it was Sunday. I'd made a late breakfast, French toast, bacon, fresh coffee, something warm and grounding. Julian came down in his old pajama pants, his hair a mess, and hugged me from behind like he used to when he was younger. "God, I missed your cooking," he said, squeezing me, chin on my shoulder. His affection was natural, effortless. And then I heard Tom's voice from the other room, "Claire, did you charge my laptop?" "No, thank you for breakfast." No hello. Just a task. A tone. A reminder that I wasn't his lover anymore, I was his assistant. His live-in habit. I didn't say anything. Just handed him the coffee he hadn't asked for. And sat down next to Julian, who looked at me like I was still whole. Still Claire. That's when I felt the shift, or maybe, that's when I noticed it. The way Tom and I started missing each other even in the same room. How our conversations became schedules and logistics. How our kisses lost heat, how his touch lingered for form but lacked purpose. I don't blame him. Not fully. Life is exhausting. Marriage is complicated. Blending families isn't some fairy tale. But I can't lie to myself anymore, something's fraying. Quietly, steadily. Like fabric stretched too thin. And today, sitting here, waiting for Julian to walk through those cafe doors, I feel more anxious than I should. I'm not here just to see my stepson. I'm here because, lately, he's the only person who looks at me like I'm more than just someone's wife. Someone's afterthought. I'm here because I need to feel something again. Even if it scares me. Even if it's wrong. Even if I don't know what comes next. Julian hugged me tight when he saw me. He'd just come out of his dorm, face flushed from the morning air, hair tousled like he'd rolled out of bed minutes before. He spotted me on the bench near the fountain and lit up. That smile, warm, boyish, made my throat catch. Mom. What are you doing here? He asked, jogging over. Surprising you. Brought you banana bread and clean socks, I laughed, holding up the tote bag. He leaned down and hugged me again, longer this time. Not rushed. He still gave real hugs, the kind that held a person, not just their body. I closed my eyes and let myself feel it. Maybe too long. Maybe not long enough. Dad know you're here? He asked as we started walking toward the dining hall. Not really, I said, dodging the question. He's in surgery all weekend. Tom's a trauma surgeon. He's brilliant, dedicated, obsessive. On call half the time, tired the other half. I used to admire that about him, how he poured himself into saving people. But lately, I just feel like one of the casualties. Another person waiting for him to look up. He's been slammed with emergencies, I added, watching Julian nod. Julian slowed his steps. He's still doing that thing where he forgets to eat for, 12 hours straight? Yup, I said, trying to keep my voice light. And forgets we exist, too. Julian gave me a look, soft, cautious. He's always been emotionally perceptive. Even as a teen, he noticed things. I remember once, he was 15, and he asked me why his dad didn't sit next to me on the couch anymore. I'd laughed it off. Brushed it aside. But I remember how that question lodged in my ribs. He notices everything. So, how are you really? He asked now. I smiled, automatic. Fine. We sat across from each other in the noisy student cafe, plastic trays between us. He was telling me about a philosophy class he liked, a girl he was seeing, how campus life felt chaotic but not in a bad way. I nodded, chimed in, but I wasn't really in the conversation. I was thinking about how the last time Tom and I had dinner out, he'd spent most of it checking his pager. How when we got home, he'd rested his hand on my thigh during a movie, and it felt more like a suggestion than comfort. I'd moved his hand. Politely. He hadn't noticed. Later that night, he'd reached for me in bed. And I hadn't had the heart to say no. It wasn't that I didn't want him. It's that I didn't feel wanted. Not really. Not for my thoughts, or my exhaustion, or the way I sometimes cried doing the dishes. Just my body, and even that, I think, out of habit. Like he was checking in out of duty. I'd hoped that morning, the one after, that he'd ask me how I was feeling. Just, something. But instead, he'd stood in the doorway with coffee in hand and said, "Thanks for last night." Like I was a nurse he was discharging. That afternoon, back home, I left Julian with a full fridge and drove straight from campus to the hospital. I didn't tell Tom I was coming, I just needed to see him. Remind myself we were still real. He met me in the lobby on his break. He looked tired, scrub cap lines pressed into his forehead, eyes bloodshot. "Claire," he said, smiling faintly. "You didn't have to come." I went in for a hug. He kissed me, deeply. Too deeply. His hand slid down my back, firm. Public, rushed, and somehow, desperate. It felt wrong. Not because I didn't want him to touch me. But because I wanted him to ask how I was first. "I missed you," he said. I opened my mouth to say something, anything honest. But I choked on it. I just smiled and said, "Me too." And as he walked back through the security doors, I realized something awful: we're both trying. Just not the way the other needs. And love, when mismatched like that, doesn't feel like love at all. It feels like noise. He got home late that evening, past 10. I was in bed already, pretending to read but really just flipping the same page over and over. Tom came in, loosened his tie, and dropped his bag in the hallway with a sigh that was louder than necessary. He always sighs like that, like it's a warning. Like the world has wrung him out and now it's my job to help him fill back up again. Long day, he said, sitting at the edge of the bed. Yeah? I replied, not looking up. He leaned over to kiss me. I turned slightly so it landed on my cheek. Not intentionally, but, maybe a little. He pulled back. Okay, he said softly, standing again to unbutton his shirt. I'm not a stranger, Claire. I didn't say you were. He undressed quietly, methodically, then slid into bed beside me. I felt the shift of the mattress, the warm weight of him nearby. He reached for me under the blanket, his palm against my stomach, warm and searching. I missed you today, he murmured into my neck. Thanks for seeing Julian. Sure, I said. My voice sounded flat, even to me. His hand moved lower. I froze, not visibly, I don't think. But something in me pulled away. Hardened. I didn't stop him, but I didn't lean in either. His lips pressed into the curve of my shoulder. Gentle, familiar. His hand slid slowly over my hip. There was no rush in his touch, and yet, something about it felt practiced. Expected. Like he was following steps. I wanted to melt into it. I did. But instead, my mind screamed, don't perform. Don't pretend to want this just because he wants you to want it. And that's when the resentment bubbled up again. Tom, I whispered. Not tonight. He stilled. His hand retreated like it had touched a stove. Okay, he said after a pause. Sure. He didn't move away completely. Just shifted slightly, enough to put a few inches between us. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for something, an apology, a question, anything. Instead, he turned on his side with a sigh. Again with the sigh. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I'm just tired. It's fine, he muttered. You don't have to explain. But I did. That was the thing. I wanted to explain, but not in 5 rushed sentences while lying in the dark. I wanted to talk about how I felt like a vending machine of affection, always expected to dispense intimacy on demand. I wanted to scream, ask me how I'm doing, ask me what I'm afraid of, ask me who I even am anymore. But instead, I just rolled away from him. And then, like clockwork, he reached out to pat my hip. Just a soft touch, a closing gesture, maybe even loving. But when his hand lingered and gave a little playful smack, the same way he used to when we were new and couldn't keep our hands off each other, I flinched. Not enough for him to see. But enough that I felt it in my teeth. He didn't notice. Maybe that was worse. I lay there after he fell asleep, stiff, aching with the guilt of wanting more, and the confusion of not knowing if more meant from him, or just in general. It wasn't that I didn't want him to want me. I just didn't want to feel obligated to want him back. My body used to answer him without hesitation. Now it waits. Questions. Evaluates. Freezes. I miss the woman who used to melt at his touch. But now? Now, every kiss feels like a request. Every touch feels like a transaction. And all I could think, lying there wide awake next to the man I used to ache for, was, why does everything have to turn into sex? The pasta was overcooked. Again. I stirred the sauce absent-mindedly, watching it bubble while Tom scrolled on his phone at the counter. He was wearing that worn gray t-shirt I used to love, the one that clung to his chest just enough to make me remember the man I used to chase around the house like we were teenagers. Now it just looked tired. Like everything else in this house. Julian texted today, I said, trying to sound casual. Said he's thinking of switching majors. Tom didn't look up. From what to what? Psych to lit. That's a downgrade. He chuckled to himself, eyes still on the glowing screen. I set the spoon down harder than I meant to. He looked up. What? I wiped my hands on a dish towel, forcing my voice to stay steady. You didn't even ask why he wants to switch. Or how he's feeling. You just made a joke. He blinked, confused. I wasn't joking at him. I was just, Jesus, Claire. Relax. And that's when it cracked. Relax? I repeated, stepping away from the stove. That's what you always say when I try to talk to you like a human being. Like a wife. Or a mother. Or a person. Tom stood slowly. What is going on right now? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just exhaustion. What's going on is I feel like I'm disappearing. Right in front of you. And you don't even notice. He frowned. Claire, where is this coming from? Because I didn't ask Julian for his emotional breakdown over a major switch? No, I snapped. Because you don't ask me for mine either. You come home. You eat. You expect sex when you're not exhausted. You kiss me like it's a chore. You touch me like I'm a routine. He stared at me, stunned. I didn't realize you felt that way. Exactly, I whispered. You didn't realize. I hadn't meant to cry. I hate crying mid-argument, it always makes me feel like I'm losing the fight. But the tears were coming, and I couldn't stop them. Not now. You didn't even ask how it felt seeing Julian again. Not really. He hugged me, Tom. He looked at me. Like I mattered. I didn't even realize how much I needed that until Tom cut me off, his voice sharp now. So what are you saying, Claire? That our son makes you feel more seen than I do? I wiped my face. I'm saying I don't know what I am to you anymore. And I'm scared I've turned into furniture. Something useful. Comfortable. Background. He was quiet. And then, coldly, that's a hell of a thing to say. After everything we'd been through. I know, I whispered. And I did. I knew how it sounded. How ugly it was to say out loud. He didn't yell. He just picked up his plate, walked to the sink, and started scraping the barely touched pasta into the garbage. I'm going for a drive, he muttered. Of course you are, I said. You always leave when it gets hard. He froze, hands gripping the plate. Then set it in the sink with a clatter. Better than staying and getting hit with emotional shrapnel I didn't see coming. The door shut harder than it needed to. And just like that, I was alone in the kitchen. Crying. Again. I sank to the floor. The tile was cold against my legs, grounding. I wrapped my arms around my knees and tried to breathe, but it felt like my lungs were locked. I'd exploded, full detonation, and for what? What had I even said that could fix anything? Nothing. And yet, everything I said was true. Messy. Desperate. But true. That was the shame of it. That I didn't plan the outburst, but part of me had wanted it. Needed it. Something had to break. Because I couldn't keep being the only one pretending we were okay. But now, in the silence that followed, all I could feel was guilt. And one awful, unshakable thought, was this really about him? Or am I just angry that someone else, someone younger, reminded me how it used to feel to be wanted? The silence wasn't immediate, it arrived slowly, like fog. Settling in around us. Dampening everything. For the first few days, we both pretended we were too busy to talk. Tom picked up extra shifts. I reorganized the linen closet and cleaned out the garage. We spoke in logistics. Did you pay the water bill? Your sister called. There's chicken in the fridge. Know us. No questions like how are you holding up? No touches that weren't purely functional. I told myself I was fine. That I needed the space. That he probably did too. But the truth? I missed him. Not the version of him I'd been fighting with, but the one I used to wake up smiling next to. The man who used to slip notes into my purse when I had a big meeting, or who once danced with me in the kitchen to no music at all. The man who cried at Julian's high school graduation and gripped my hand so tightly I thought it might bruise. I missed him. One morning, maybe a week after the argument, I woke up early and padded into the kitchen. Tom was already dressed, pouring coffee into his travel mug. He didn't look up. "You working a double again?" I asked, softly. He nodded. "Yup." I wanted to ask him to stay. Or just to sit. To let us figure it out. But the words felt too fragile, and I was still afraid they'd shatter if I said them out loud. Instead, I watched him from across the room. He looked thinner. Older. Not in a bad way, just worn. His shoulders hunched a little more. His eyes didn't hold that edge of focus they usually did. I wasn't the only one breaking. I just hadn't seen it. When he finally glanced up, our eyes met for a second. Long enough for me to say something. Apologize. Reach for him. But I didn't. He gave me a tight smile and walked out the door. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling again. I kept replaying the fight. My words. His face. The way I accused him of things I hadn't even fully processed myself. He wasn't a villain. He wasn't cruel. He was tired. Human. Grieving something too, probably, the closeness we'd lost, the woman I used to be. Maybe even himself. He had tried, in his own way. The hugs, the kisses, the quiet touches. They weren't always what I needed, but they were what he had. And I'd met them with walls. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been starving for something deeper. Emotional intimacy. Real presence. I wanted to be understood, not just accommodated. And somewhere along the line, we'd lost the language for that. That was what scared me most. Because how do you come back from silence that thick? How do you reach for someone when you don't know what you're reaching for anymore? And worse, what if the problem isn't just him? What if I'm changing? What if I've outgrown the version of love we built? I thought about Julian again. The way he hugged me without hesitation. How natural it had felt to be held without expectation. That brief, warm moment had pulled me out of the fog. Not romantically, God, no, but viscerally. It reminded me of how connection is supposed to feel. Alive. Unforced. Mutual. I missed that. With Tom. And maybe that's the first step, admitting I still want it with him. I turned onto my side, pulled the blanket around me, and breathed deep. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow I'll try. Even if I don't know how. Even if I'm scared it's too late. Because if there's even a flicker left in us, I want to be the one who doesn't walk away. I found him in the garage, late Saturday afternoon, tightening a bolt on the lawnmower he barely used. He didn't look up when I opened the door, but I saw the shift in his shoulders, the small brace of someone preparing for more silence. Or another fight. I made coffee, I said, holding out a mug. He took it, nodded. Thanks. We stood there, awkward and quiet, the buzz of the ceiling light filling the space where our voices used to live. I miss us, I said finally. He looked at me then. Eyes tired, cautious. Which version? The one where we told each other the truth. Even when it hurt. He gave a soft, bitter laugh. You mean the version before I became a checklist? My throat tightened. That's not fair. Neither was being accused of treating you like furniture. We stared at each other, all the weight of weeks between us. The grief of what we'd let slip. The quiet terror that maybe we couldn't reach it again. I've been angry, I admitted. Lonely. And not just because of you. I think I've been disappearing from myself. You just didn't notice. I did, he said, voice low. I just didn't know what to do about it. And that simple, broken truth, undid me more than any argument. He stepped forward, slowly, and rested his hand against my cheek. Tentative. Not expecting anything in return. Just touching me. I never stopped loving you, he whispered. I just forgot how to show up. A tear slipped down my face, and I didn't wipe it away. He didn't kiss me, not right away. Just pulled me into his chest, both arms wrapped around me like he was anchoring something in place. We stood like that, in the dusty garage, smelling like oil and old wood, holding each other like it was the only thing we had left that still made sense. Later, we sat on the back porch, coffee gone cold between us, and talked. Not perfectly. Not even gracefully. But honestly. About expectations. About silence. About touch that doesn't feel safe anymore, and what it might take to rebuild that trust. About needing to feel wanted, not just reached for out of habit. We didn't make promises. We didn't pretend everything could snap back. But that night, when we climbed into bed, he didn't reach for me like a question. He just laced his fingers through mine. No pressure. No performance. Just presence. He kissed my forehead before turning off the light. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I just felt held. Maybe that's not a grand, sweeping return to passion. Maybe it's better. Maybe it's real. You want to know what no one tells you about love? It's not the grand gestures that save it. It's not the anniversaries, the vacations, or the late-night makeups. It's the quiet stuff. The stuff that doesn't get posted or shared or even spoken out loud. It's whether you turn toward each other when no one's watching. Or whether you turn away. I spent a long time believing that if a relationship started strong, if the passion was real, if the connection was magnetic, then the rest would just follow. That desire would carry us through the hard seasons. That affection would be enough to fill the gaps when words failed. But I was wrong. Or at least, I was incomplete. Desire doesn't survive in silence. And affection without attention can start to feel like obligation. Tom and I were never broken in some explosive way. We didn't cheat or scream or walk out. We just faded. We got busy. We got tired. We got used to each other, not in the comforting way people talk about, but in the kind of way that lets you start skipping the check-ins. The eye contact. The questions. And then one day, I found myself craving something I couldn't name, until I saw it reflected in Julian's eyes. I know how that sounds. But you have to understand, it wasn't romantic. It wasn't inappropriate. It was reminding. That hug, that easy affection, it reminded me of what it used to feel like to be seen. Really seen. Not through the lens of responsibility or routine, but just, as Claire. A woman. A person worth pausing for. That day on campus cracked something open in me. And what poured out wasn't lust or fantasy, it was grief. Grief for the woman I'd stopped checking in on. Grief for the man I'd stopped reaching for, because I didn't know how to ask for what I needed. Grief for the version of us that had slowly become polite strangers. Tom didn't deserve my silence. But I didn't deserve to be touched like a task either. We heard each other quietly. Over time. With good intentions and missed signals. But here's what I know now, love isn't something you feel. It's something you notice. And then nurture. Over and over again. After that argument in the kitchen, I thought it might be over. Honestly, part of me wondered if I wanted it to be. I was so tired of performing, of pretending, of swallowing words to keep the peace. But what surprised me was what came next. Not flowers. Not some passionate apology. Just space. And then, slowly, effort. He started asking questions again. Small ones. Real ones. I started answering them. We touched, but without expectation. We kissed, but without the old urgency, and somehow, that made it feel more sacred. We remembered that intimacy isn't just sex. It's seeing. It's listening. It's choosing someone even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And me? I started paying attention to myself again. Not just as a wife, or a mother, or a woman in her 40s with fine lines and low tolerance for noise, but as someone who's still becoming. And I realized, I don't want the kind of love that asks me to disappear quietly. I want the kind that waits for me to come back. Even when I'm lost. Even when I've turned away. Tom and I are still learning. Some nights are still silent. But there's effort again. There's warmth. There's a different kind of spark, not the fire of newness, but the steady kind that keeps you warm when the wind picks up. If you're listening to this wondering whether you're still in love, I can't answer that for you. But I will say this, love that's worth saving rarely feels like magic. It feels like work. And sometimes, the work is the miracle.